Imagine a war so chaotic, so brutal, that every move could rewrite history. Yet in the middle of all that, the Allies built a secret plan so deceptive, so invisible, that Hitler never even realized it was unfolding right beneath his nose. This wasn't just strategy, it was psychological warfare on a continent-wide scale, and by the time he figured out the truth, it was already too late. Today, we're diving inside the Allied operation that quietly flipped the momentum of World War II, a masterclass in misdirection. Fake armies, phantom radio messages, and a plan so bold it tricked one of the most feared intelligence networks in the world. This is the hidden blueprint that shaped D-Day, confused the German high command, and exposed just how blind Hitler really was. Let's break down what he never saw coming and why it worked. The Allied plan began long before Hitler ever imagined his empire could be threatened in places he considered untouchable. In smoky war rooms, from London to Washington, strategists quietly sketched the blueprint of a deception so intricate it would warp German intelligence for months. They studied Hitler's obsessions, his blind spots, and his emotional impulses, like scientists studying a volatile experiment. Their goal wasn't just to outfight him, but to outthink him at every turn. And to do that they needed a plan invisible to German eyes, but devastating once revealed. What made this plan terrifying was how ordinary it seemed on the surface, masking a complexity Hitler's inner circle never imagined. British spies fed the Germans crumbs of information that felt too perfect to ignore, knowing the Wehrmacht would swallow every detail. Each forged memo, each fake troop movement, each intercepted message was crafted with the precision of a master illusionist. Even the timing of leaks was orchestrated to match German hopes, fears, and strategic assumptions. Slowly, the Allies built a world of lies that felt more real to the Nazis than the truth. Hitler's confidence in his own intuition was the weakness the Allies exploited most skillfully. The Führer believed he possessed an unmatched strategic instinct, often overriding the advice of his generals if it clashed with his gut feelings. Allied intelligence understood this psychological trap better than many in the German high command, so they designed their deceptions to flatter Hitler's worldview, making the lies align perfectly with what he already wanted to believe. In doing so, they didn't just deceive him, they guided his thinking without him ever realizing it. At the center of this growing deception machine was a network of double agents, whose loyalty was hidden in layers of manipulation. These agents, many originally recruited by Germany, secretly served the Allied cause and shaped the flow of disinformation. They became the shadows behind Hitler's strategic assumptions, bending German expectations with every report they sent. Their messages were so consistent and so carefully structured that German intelligence treated them as gold. Yet behind the curtain, the Allies controlled every word they wrote. Among these agents, one figure stood out as the ultimate weapon against Nazi intelligence. A quiet, unassuming man known by the codey name Garbo. Garbo fed the Germans an entire fictional network of spies they believed stretched across Britain like an invisible web. The sheer audacity of his operation was so convincing that the Germans rewarded him richly, never realizing they were paying for their own downfall. Every false update he crafted was reviewed by British handlers who shaped the narrative like authors of a wartime novel. And as Garbo's credibility soared, the Allies gained the power to steer German strategy itself. With Hitler unknowingly trapped inside this constructed world of misinformation, the Allies began shaping the next phase of their plan with calculated patience. They needed him to believe the wrong threat, the wrong direction, and the wrong timeline, all at once. This required a level of coordination across continents that no empire in history had attempted before. American factories, British codebreakers, and global spy networks all moved in silent harmony to maintain the illusion. Every actor from generals to clerks played their part without ever revealing the full picture. What Hitler never realized was that many of his maps were already useless, sabotaged by misinformation that twisted his perception of Allied capabilities. Fake divisions appeared to exist on his reports. Fake armies were assigned to regions where no real force existed, and fake supply movements were recorded as if they were gospel. German reconnaissance would occasionally catch glimpses of the truth, but the false narrative always drowned it out. The Nazi generals grew increasingly frustrated as reality refused to match their expectations. Hitler, meanwhile, clung to the misinformation with an almost stubborn satisfaction. This divergence between reality and belief was precisely what the Allies needed to move to the next phase. Manipulating Germany's sense of geography, they wanted Hitler to think the Allies would strike a target that had deep emotional significance to him, a place he was determined to defend at all costs. By choosing such a location, they ensured he would misallocate troops and supplies, weakening the real front. The plan had to be bold enough to feel tempting yet logical enough to feel undeniable. And once this location was chosen, the Allies would build an entire universe of false clues to support it. The Germans believed they possessed some of the best intelligence analysts in the world, but the Allies weren't fighting their logic, they were fighting their assumptions. Every German analyst approached intelligence with Hitler's worldview in mind, and that single constraint made them predictable. If a piece of information matched Hitler's preferences, it was accepted. If it challenged them, it was dismissed. The Allies turned this psychological filter into a weapon more powerful than any bomb. They didn't need to hide the truth. They only needed to make the lies more appealing. Meanwhile, Allied High Command understood that secrecy alone couldn't win the war. Timing was equally crucial. The deception needed to escalate at a pace that felt natural, avoiding anything that would feel suspicious or forced. Too little information would spark doubts. Too much would appear staged. So intelligence officers carefully balanced real events with fabricated ones, crafting a seamless flow that kept the Germans locked onto the wrong target. And with each passing week, the plan became more dangerous and more brilliant. This strategic dance stretched across multiple domains, from radio intercepts to diplomatic whispers to troop movements visible from enemy aircraft. Every medium became a tool of misdirection, part of a grand puzzle Hitler believed he was solving. German analysts felt confident as they pieced together these fragments, not realizing the Allies had prearranged them like actors hitting their marks. What felt like genuine discovery was actually controlled exposure, and the Germans, guided by this illusion, stepped deeper into the trap. By now, the deception had reached a scale so massive that even some Allied officers struggled to comprehend its full scope. Reports traveled through encrypted channels, passed between intelligence divisions, and were fed to Allied leaders who had to act convincingly, based on what the Germans believed. The illusion became a parallel reality one the Allies maintained with religious discipline. Every slip-up could have shattered months of preparation, but the coordination remained airtight, tightening the noose around Hitler's strategic vision. Hitler's generals sensed something was wrong, but they lacked the power to challenge the narrative that had gripped the Führer. Every time a skeptical voice rose within the high command, Hitler silenced them with confidence and frustration. He reminded them of his inner compass, the instinct he believed had built the German war machine. And because dissent in Nazi Germany was often fatal, many generals learned to swallow their doubts. This internal fear only amplified the success of the Allied deception. The Allies' decision to weaponize Hitler's psychology proved more effective than any conventional tactic used in the war. They attacked not his armies, but the roots of his strategic thinking. They exploited his pride, his paranoia, and his desperate need to appear infallible. Each new false clue was designed not just to deceive, but to manipulate his emotional responses. And as he reacted, the Allies watched with chilling precision. By the time Hitler realized he had been misled, the full force of the plan was already unfolding in motion, reshaping the war's trajectory. The deception had not just tricked him, it had reconfigured the movement of entire armies. German troops stood waiting for a battle that would never come, guarding coastlines where no Allied soldier would ever land. Supplies were stuck in the wrong regions, reinforcements were stuck defending shadows, and the real front grew silently weaker. This was the quiet genius that made the Allied plan one Hitler never saw coming. While German spies hunted for clues across Europe, the Allies quietly turned the entire continent into a stage 4 misinformation, feeding Hitler the exact story they wanted him to believe. Every message, every troop movement, every staged operation worked like wires in a giant puppet show, pulling German intelligence in the wrong direction. British MI5 started by identifying every German agent operating in the UK, flipping nearly all of them into double agents, and turning them into the backbone of Operation Bodyguard. These agents provided Berlin with constant updates that fit Hitler's worldview too perfectly to doubt. And with each false report, the Allies tightened the noose without firing a single bullet. One of the most brilliant pieces in this deception machine was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, a man so convincing that the Germans trusted him more than their own generals. Garbo created a fictional network of 27 each with believable backstories that made German intelligence feel like they had deep, reliable coverage of Britain. Every one of his reports was carefully timed to match Allied movements, but always pointed to false conclusions. He became Berlin ese most valuable spy. Yet he never once worked for Germany. He served the Allies from day one. By the time D-Day approached, Hitler considered Garbo's warnings gospel. The Allies knew that Hitler loved patterns, so they fed him patterns he desperately wanted to see. Reports suggested the Allies were gathering enormous forces in southeast England, preparing for a massive invasion at Pot. Garbo described imaginary divisions moving into position, fake supply depots being filled, and counterfeit tank battalions forming up behind Kisilaman nets. To make it believable, the Allies deployed inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, fake radio chatter, and entire phantom armies under the name First U.S. Army Group. From the air, from intercepted communications, even from agent reports, the illusion looked perfect. Hitler's obsession with Calais wasn't just arrogancy, it was strategic tunnel vision, and the Allies weaponized it. He believed the shortest crossing from Britain to France made Calais the only logical invasion point. So the Allies designed every detail to amplify this bias. Fake troop concentrations constantly grew near Dover, while real divisions for Normandy stayed hidden inland. Dummy landing craft were placed at fake ports, giving the German Luftwaffe photographs that seemed undeniable. Every deception reinforced Hitler's belief that the Allies would never risk an attack on the beaches of Normandy. But deception wasn't only physical, it was psychological, too. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park read German communications around the clock, adjusting their fake reports to fit whatever doubts German officers expressed. If a German general questioned why tanks weren't moving, the next double agent message explained it with a believable excuse. If a Luftwaffe reconnaissance mission spotted something suspicious, an entire new cover story was created the same day. The War of Shadows became so detailed that the Allies practically controlled what the German high command believed was real. German military planners tried to verify Calais as the main invasion site, but their intelligence network was diluted with misinformation. Many of their trusted agents were controlled by Britain, and the few legitimate spies they had left were isolated or misled. Even when small inconsistencies appeared, Berlin dismissed them as normal fog of war confusion. Hitler himself insisted that Normandy was just a diversion meant to draw German forces away from Calais. His refusal to reconsider became the Allies' greatest strategic advantage. Meanwhile, in southern England, the Phantom Army commanded by General George Patton kept performing staged exercises meant solely for German reconnaissance planes. Patton's reputation as a bold, unstoppable commander made the Germans believe he would lead any major invasion. So the Allies created fake troop assemblies, counterfeit runways, and scripted movements that looked convincing from the sky. Whenever German aircraft flew overhead, the army came alive with motion vehicles, driving in circles, soldiers marching between dummy tents. Every detail reinforced one message: the invasion would come at Calais. To deepen the illusion, RADIO operators broadcast endless coded chatter, describing non-existent divisions moving toward Dover. German codebreakers intercepted this traffic and catalogued it as confirmed intelligence. None realized the signals were actually generated by small teams of specialists, switching between multiple frequencies to imitate a massive force. The Germans trusted this radio chatter because it matched the double agents' reports perfectly. The Allies had created a complete feedback loop of lies that validated itself at every layer. Nowhere was the deception more ambitious than Operation Fortitude South, the cornerstone of the entire Allied strategy. It built an imaginary invasion army that was larger than any real force stationed in Britain at that time. The operation included forged paperwork, fabricated logistics schedules, fake officer rosters, and entire warehouses filled with imitation equipment. Even railway cargo manifests listed tank deliveries to Caliban units that didn't exist. In the fog of war, Fortitude South became the most realistic lie Hitler ever believed. But the deception wasn't just about tricking Hitler to keep German reinforcements locked in the wrong place for as long as possible. The Allies knew that even if Normandy was invaded successfully, German counterattacks could crush the beachhead. So Operation Bodyguard extended beyond D-Day, continuing to claim that Calais was still the real invasion point. Hitler kept nearly 15 powerful divisions frozen in the Calais region, unwilling to release them even as Normandy burned. Those withheld reinforcements became the difference between Allied survival and total collapse. The deception efforts expanded into the Mediterranean, where fake plans suggested an Allied invasion of Greece or Norway. These secondary operations relieved pressure on the real invasion routes by splitting German attention. Even minor reports from local partisans or intercepted Allied plans fed Berlin's confusion. Hitler became convinced the Allies were preparing attacks on multiple fronts at once. This strategic fog made it impossible for German command to allocate forces effectively. Operation Zeppelin, centered on the Balkans, played directly into Hitler's distrust of southern Europe. Fake troop movements in Egypt, bogus plans leaked in Turkey, and fabricated naval routes in the Mediterranean all pointed to an invasion through Greece. German command debated the possibility for weeks, preventing them from redirecting divisions to France. Even after D-Day began, Hitler still believed another landing could be coming from the south. The Allies had transformed uncertainty into paralysis, while the Germans obsessed over phantom threats. Allied engineers prepared real infrastructure essential for landing at Normandy, but even this preparation required deceptive cover stories to hide the enormous scale of the buildup. Shipyards producing real landing craft pretended to be manufacturing merchant vessels. Airfields hosting invasion aircraft staged training routines designed to look unrelated to amphibious assaults. Every real movement was wrapped in layers of misdirection. Clandestine. clandestine. Allied units also sabotaged German listening posts and communication networks to distort the information the Germans were receiving. Resistance fighters cut telephone lines, disrupted German patrols, and fed misleading reports to local authorities. The sabotage created gaps in German intelligence that double agents conveniently filled with fabricated stories. With every shadow operation, the picture in Berlin grew more misleading. The Allies ensured the Germans had just enough information to believe but not enough to question. The deception web stretched across oceans as well, supported by American intelligence operations. The U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, helped create false troop deployment maps and leaked fake documents through supposedly neutral diplomats. These documents were deliberately accessible to German spies and always reinforced the Calais narrative. Multiple streams of false intelligence from different continents convinced Hitler that the story had to be true. He believed he was witnessing enemy weakness, when in reality he was staring directly at their trap. The German High Command tried to verify its suspicions by sending more reconnaissance aircraft over Britain. But every flight encountered the same staged scenes. Fake tanks arranged in patents, dummy fortifications near Dover, and non-existent divisions moving through fake logistical hubs. Even crash-landed German planes were exploited by the Allies, who planted accidentally discovered papers outlining the Calais invasion plan. Every attempt to confirm the truth only strengthened the lie. The perfect deception is one that rewards the victim for believing it. The Allies exploited Hitler's fear of diversionary attacks. He believed any major landing would be followed by a second, even larger invasion. So when the Normandy invasion finally launched, Hitler assumed it was merely the opening act of the Calais assault. The German commanders were ordered not to move their Calais troops under any circumstances. This hesitation allowed the Allies to fortify their beachhead without facing the full weight of German power. Even after D-Day, Garbo continued sending messages that reinforced the Calais narrative. He reported that the Normandy landings were a distraction meant to pull German forces away from the real attack. Berlin swallowed the bait and sent him congratulatory messages for his service. Hitler believed the main invasion would occur weeks after Normandy, so he kept his strongest divisions immobilized. Garbo's lies bought the Allies' precious time measured not in minutes but in lives saved. In the aftermath, German generals tried to explain the intelligence failure, but the truth was brutal. They had been outplayed not by superior force, but by superior imagination. Every detail of the Allied plan was designed to hit Germany where it was most vulnerable, its leaders' blind spots. Hitler trusted gut instinct more than evidence, and the Allies turned that instinct against him. The war had surprised him many times, but this was the one blow he truly never saw coming. By the time Hitler realized Calais was a myth, the Allied foothold in Normandy was unbreakable. Supplies were pouring in faster than German forces could counter. The deception had already reshaped the battlefield, setting the stage for the liberation of France. It was no longer just an invasion, it was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. And the Allied plan that fooled Hitler had become one of the greatest strategic victories in modern history. Asterisk, asterisk 1. Asterisk, asterisk, as the Allies finalized their timing, the entire invasion plan hinged on a tiny window of weather that almost no one believed would hold. The seas were rough, the skies were clouded, and German meteorologists were certain an invasion was impossible. That false confidence created the exact blind spot the Allies desperately needed to make their move. Eisenhower's commanders knew hesitation could cost them everything, but delaying could also mean losing the surprise forever. In the end, the decision to go forward felt like stepping into a storm with no map yet. It became the most important gamble of the entire war. When the first airborne troops dropped behind enemy lines, German officers initially assumed it was a small raid rather than the opening blow of a massive operation. Disconnected reports came in, confused and contradicting each other, making it nearly impossible for the German command to understand the scale. The Allies had trained for chaos, and now they used it like a weapon, scattering enemy units in all directions. Bridges were seized, roads were blocked, and communication lines were cut before sunrise. Every minute of confusion bought the Allies another inch of advantage. Meanwhile, the naval armada moving toward Normandy became the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. Yet it approached under the cloak of distraction and weather. German patrol boats were either out of position or fooled by the decoy signals, still echoing around Paddock. The few who spotted glimpses of the fleet couldn't convince their superiors that this was the main event. Hitler's belief in a fake army across from Calais had become a strategic prison for his own high command. Because of that, the real landing went forward with far less resistance than the Germans should have mounted. As Allied landing crafts hit the beaches, each sector erupted into its own brutal, unpredictable reality. Some units moved quickly through thin defenses, while others were pinned down in deadly fire. The secret to success was not uniform strength, it was overwhelming surprise. German officers scrambled to react, but every radio call only reinforced their belief that the real invasion was still coming later. That single misunderstanding slowed reinforcement orders by hours that would prove irreversible. By mid-morning, Allied troops had carved small but significant footholds across multiple beaches, each one anchoring the next phase of the invasion. Tanks, artilleries, and endless waves of infantry pushed inland, turning those fragile beachheads into a rising tide. The Germans could no longer push back. The deception plan had done its job. The defenders were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and still unsure whether to commit their reserves. Every mile gain tightened the Allied grip and weakened Germany's ability to respond effectively. The battle was shifting, not because the Germans lacked strength, but because they lacked clarity. While fighting raged at Normandy, German generals desperately requested permission to deploy their armored divisions to counter, but Hitler, still convinced the Calais invasion was imminent, refused to release them. His hesitation didn't just slow Germany's defense, it crippled it. The longer he waited, the more the Allies established a secure landing zone with artillery, supply lines, and reinforcements. What should have been a decisive counterblow turned into a delayed, weakened response that arrived far too late. By the time German armored units finally mobilized toward Normandy, the Allies had already built momentum that couldn't be reversed. Each hour of delay allowed more ships to unload troops, fuel, ammunition, and vehicles that Germany could no longer match at the same pace. When the tanks arrived, they found a battlefield that had already transformed into an Allied fortress. The deception campaign had stretched German decision-making to the breaking point. Victory was no longer about who fought harder, but who had outfought the other before the battle even began. The Germans still fought savagely in the countryside, turning every hedgerow into a defensive trap that slowed Allied progress. But the strategic damage had already been done by the deception operation months earlier. The Germans were fighting uphill, outnumbered and constantly forced to guess where the next push would come from. Their officers argued among themselves about whether Normandy was the real invasion at all. That confusion meant they never formed a unified, confident strategy to push the Allies back into the sea. As the Allied armies pushed deeper into France, the psychological impact of the deception plan finally became clear. German commanders admitted they had been outsmarted long before the first shots were fired. Their intelligence networks had been blinded, their expectations twisted, and their ability to act decisively. The Allies had weaponized misinformation as effectively as tanks and bombs. For the first time, German officers realized they were fighting an enemy who could win battles before they even began. Operation Fortitude, the secret plan behind the scenes, had done more than trick Hitler. It had reshaped the entire rhythm of the war. By forcing Germany's best units to wait at the wrong location, the Allies gained the freedom to attack where defenses were weak. Every victory in Normandy, every liberated town, every mile gained traced back to that one brilliant shadow operation. Without it, the landing might have collapsed under overwhelming German firepower. Instead, it opened the door to the fall of Paris, the collapse of German positions, and the final march toward victory in Europe. As Allied supply lines grew stronger, the deception still paid dividends because the Germans never fully abandoned their belief in a second invasion. Even in July, they kept major divisions pinned near Calais, fearing an attack that would never come. This hesitation cut their effective strength nearly in half on the actual front line. It proved that the most powerful weapon in war isn't always firepower, it's certainty, and the Allies had taken certainty away from the German high command piece by piece. Germany's final attempts to mount a large counteroffensive in the region never materialized with the power they needed. Allied air superiority shattered most armored movements before they reached critical positions. The ground forces remaining on the German side were trapped in fragmented defensive pockets, making coordinated operations impossible. The psychological shock of being deceived lingered, creating distrust and blame among their own ranks. That internal collapse came at the exact moment the Allies surged forwards. As German units retreated toward the interior, Allied commanders could clearly see how thoroughly the deception plan had reshaped the battlefield. The invasion's success was not just a triumph of courage and military hardware, it was a victory of imagination and planning. The secret armies, the fake radio chatter, the double agents, and the forged documents had all worked together, like gears in a giant invisible machine. Each piece contributed to an illusion so convincing that even seasoned German generals fell for it, and that illusion changed the course of history. Once the Allies broke out of Normandy, the momentum became unstoppable, turning the invasion into a full-scale liberation of Europe. German resistance collapsed faster than expected in multiple regions, as supply shortages, communication breakdowns, and demoralization spread. Everything that happened afterward, the fall of France, the push into Germany, And the end of the war in Europe was built on the foundation laid by the deception. The Germans were fighting with broken assumptions from the very beginning. When a war begins with false information, every strategy built on it eventually falls apart. The true power of the Allied plan was that Hitler never understood it, even after the invasion succeeded. He remained convinced for weeks that Normandy was not the real front. That miscalculation cost him the last chance to stop the Allies from establishing a foothold. The deception operation didn't just support the invasion, it dismantled Germany's ability to think clearly. And when a commander loses clarity, he loses the war long before the final battle is fought. In the end, the Allied plan that Hitler never saw coming wasn't just a military strategy. It was the turning point that rewired the entire direction of the war. It showed that even the most feared war machine on Earth could be outmaneuvered when timing, deception, and unity collided with perfect precision. Hitler spent years believing the world would always react to his moves, but this operation proved the Allies could strike first, strike smarter, and strike where he least expected. As the beaches of Europe erupted with Allied troops and the skies thundered with aircraft he failed to anticipate, the myth of Nazi invincibility shattered. Behind every soldier who stepped onto those shores was a plan built on secrecy, disinformation, and bold execution. A plan designed to outthink someone who believed he could never be outsmarted. And from that moment on, the war's momentum flipped for good. This was the beginning of the end, the moment when an entire alliance showed that even the darkest regimes can be broken when the world refuses to surrender. And that's why this operation will forever remain the move Hitler didn't predict, didn't understand, and couldn't stop.